All right, welcome to Buzzkill episode 2. This is Jay Leask, and I'm here with the esteemed Hunter Willis. Good to see you, Hunter.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having me, Jay. I don't feel esteemed. I feel locked up in my house, but thank you. I know we are all feeling that way right now, though. I'm just thankful to have my health.
Hey,
That's a
man.
high
Next,
praise, though. High praise. It's really good to be here.
it is. You said something to me earlier, made me laugh. We were prepping for this call, and I don't remember your exact words, but you made me feel like Buzzkill's a conversation. Like we're sitting here, we're talking about the hard things nobody has time to talk about. Then I realized, geez, it's like sitting down with your therapist. Like I really want to talk about change management, but no one will talk to me about it. How does that make you feel? Like that's really what
Yeah.
what last week felt like a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Um, so today, one of the things we talked about, I think we had a good 101, intro to change management and how to get it rolling in an era where no one's really giving you that ability. This week we talked about trying to take it up a notch. We've seen a complete change over the last 3-4 months in how knowledge workers get their work done. And so the goal today is let's address that. Let's talk about it. We didn't really talk about that last week, because I think that'll help set the table for the next few episodes.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we can dive into to deep dive conversations about the things that we touch on today. And also, it'd be really good to dive in more to what's happening right now with the COVID pandemic and everybody working from home that we're seeing from a lot of organizations, and then the change management and the adoption of the modern workplace, the digital workplace that we're seeing for so many organizations. It's happening overnight now. So
Yeah.
it's been a really crazy transition for a lot of companies. We have a lot of customers, a lot of people in the community that I've been speaking with. It's made Teams, obviously, they announced today that Teams has more than doubled in active daily users since the beginning of this, right? It's hit like 74 million, I think they said, active daily users.
Yep.
They announced
Yep.
today. So that's a really big deal. And it's just to show, and this is just in our industry. And again, to highlight, Jay and I work in the Microsoft Office 365 industry, but we're going to be touching on these concepts at a high enough level that it really can apply to just any kind of online collaboration platform. So whether that's like Google, G Suite, the same principles apply. And also, full disclosure, we both do work for AvePoint. So when we say our customers, we're talking about AvePoint customers and the things that we do there. Um, I think, though, the examples that we're about to dive into, as we've been discussing, are not related to AvePoint and the work that we do. These are actually people that we're friends with in the community. And actually, Jay's going to give an example of something that he encountered personally in his community and saw with what's going on with his kids' school districts, right? But I
Yeah.
have been talking to a lot of people across the board and seeing, there's so much buzz around this right now. And the most of the driver, most of the content around this is like, hey, you can do all this cool stuff with the chat platforms and Zoom and the many windows and the backgrounds for Teams and all the things. And all that
Yep.
is great. And enabling people to get productivity out of the cloud is fantastic. But here at Buzzkill, we talk about the difficult part of things, the stuff that's not fun to touch on. And
Yeah.
so we're going to dive into some of the pain points of this, things to
Hmm.
look out for, and some of the ways you can plan right now as IT organizations are going through this like massive, rapid change and having to deal with that. Some of the
Yeah.
stuff that we're seeing and some advice around how to tackle that and handle it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, Jay, why don't you tell us about the things that you've seen so far?
So we've been home for 7 weeks now. And I mean, I'm not trying to pitch a sob story. Like, we've gone to the grocery store and made a few trips to Home Depot, and I just had a lumber delivery today for the swing set I'm building in the backyard, because all of our weekend plans are canceled. But no, we've been home for 7 weeks now. I share my home office. It's probably like 17 by 12 or so. I share that space with my wife, who's a high school English teacher, and my daughter we have a table in here for crafts and stuff, so the three of us use this space together a lot. And it's been really interesting to see. So my wife teaches for a school district in a neighboring county, and then my daughter goes to the school district in the county we live in. So I've got two different school districts that we follow, and it's been really interesting to see the two different approaches to this pandemic. The home school district, they immediately gave their teachers a full training day on how to do synchronous video-based learning. I think they took about 3 weeks to get through spring break, and then they tried to roll out synchronous learning via video to all of their students, 100,000 students in the county. My wife's district, they took a different approach. They decided to go with asynchronous learning. So they have an office hour. They have a learning platform. You may have heard there's a couple of them out there: Google Classroom, Blackboard. There's a handful of different tools out there that can be used. So they're using their learning platform to share assignments, and they have instructions on about how much they should be sharing every week, and then they have their office hour. But it is a much more hands-off approach to learning, which it's not what you expect from school, from public school, second grade, eighth grade, whatever. But it's been interesting to hear her approach and why it makes more sense. On the other hand, my daughter's school district, they went, we're going to do live class and raw, and it was cool, and I appreciated it. The first day, they had problems with people logging in. They had problems with people using these anonymous links and using, IP freely and other really bad names as their anonymous names. They had people setting their profile pictures as things that are far more offensive than this background is. It was a disaster. So they actually shut it down halfway through the day. They canceled all remaining. First there was a 2-hour delay, and then they shut it down. And this county has some crazy problems with delays and closing for cold. So like to start that day with a 2-hour delay, everyone's like, really? You really? So then the next week they tried again, and it turns out, this is where it comes to this change management conversation. Sorry for taking so long to get there, but it turns out they were using on-premises software that they hadn't updated in 3 years.
How often do you have to update it, really?
Well, all those new features that your vendor says you have access to, you don't have access to because you've chosen not to install them. And IT actually, someone in IT, I don't remember who exactly, actually sent an article to the Washington Post showing all of the times they tried to recommend these updates and enhancements and the responses that they got, and telling them, no, you can't do this. No, you can't make these changes. So IT's like, look, man, we tried. Don't blame us, and don't blame the vendor for your poor change management. And it's been crazy. Now, here we are 7 weeks in. We're actually pretty successful. My daughter's got an hour every day with her second grade teacher for education, another hour to ask any questions she has, and a series of assignments. So I'm very satisfied for a second grader. But like getting there it was 7 weeks of crazy because nobody wants to talk about change. So it's been insane.
Yeah, and I've got a buddy here, and I'm in Richmond, Virginia, and I've got a buddy that works for a nonprofit here. He was talking to me about what happened. We had a really good, nice, long conversation the other day. And we've been working together, and I've helped him out with a couple of pointers here and there, kind of a thing, but he's done a really good job. He's done a really good job with teams and setting it up for their organization. But beyond just regular kind of file access and sharing, he's had a really hard time getting people to adopt the chat and to really use Teams first as a place to go to interact with the rest of the people in the organization. Still mostly using like email and OneDrive and stuff. And when this happened, within days, he had multiple people in the organization contacting him and thanking him because they felt like they didn't have Teams to rely on, that they would not still have their jobs, because it's the only way that they can coordinate activities and projects and share information fast enough to maintain, the level of productivity they had before. And he actually got like a recognition from his C-levels saying, listen, he saved the day by having this ready for us, even though nobody really got what was going on or wanted to use it much. Now it's like the whole
Yeah.
organization is dependent upon it for their existential, being. So it's
Yep.
we're seeing that a whole lot. And I've heard that from other people in the industry in our community here too in Richmond, the Richmond SharePoint user group. And it's just to say that this is kind of when you hear and see those things, not only is it kind of like aha, I told you so for the organization from IT, but it's also this is what we're doing, right? This is the feel good part. We're literally saving jobs as this
Yeah.
crisis is happening because we're enabling people with the tools to be able to maintain their productivity and justifying the organization to continue paying those people to be busy, right?
Yeah.
Big
We have a
deal.
customer. We have a customer on the West Coast who has been fighting the good fight on collaboration, and he was brought in, and the first thing he noticed is so the city. He was brought in as kind of an underling, and the city was like, "Okay, underling, here is this plan that we have, and we're going to get this technology from this vendor, and this technology from this vendor, and this technology from this vendor, and over the next few years, we're going to start rolling this all out." And he looked at it and he's like, "Well, have you actually looked at how these marry together, and how they compete, and where you're spending extra money?" And so he started walking them through this process, and he got the typical response of we don't want to talk about this. We're moving forward. We've already made these decisions. But he, like your buddy, he kind of fought the good fight. And even though he was getting pushback on change management and on training, he kept documenting. He kept having these conversations, and in completely butchering his story, when the city shut down and sent all of the workers home and said, "You will work from home. Here are the tools that are available to you." He had the exact same response from his C-suite, which was, "Wow, like, we're really glad that you have been pushing on the back end, despite the pushback you've received. You've been pushing to get this stuff rolled out because our city is able to continue to work rather than just lose all productivity." I mean, there's clearly, we're not talking about frontline workers as much. There are some things that you need to consider there, but we're talking about the people who sit in front of a computer all day long and manage records and handle contracts and receive, like in a city's case, receive complaints or comments or questions from constituents, and being able to actually still do that job with the technology you have. If you aren't pushing right now for what is new in the space, how are you prepared for? I mean, nobody thinks to be prepared for something like this. But this is a worst case scenario. Think about like the middle case.
Yeah, but there are people that when you look at risk, right, and people that deal with risk, there is a book called Loon Shots, and the guy's name escapes me. Great book, but he basically breaks down management and like change thinking, as well as like how you run an organization, how you deliver projects. Breaks it into two categories: people that are risk averse and people that are okay taking risks. And you have to like balance the two, because some people need to take risks. Creative people and
Yes.
developers and people that are experimenting with stuff, they need to take risks and they need to be able to allow to do that. But at the same time, it needs to be mitigated, and organizations still need to operate. So there need to be people that try to curb that risk. And one of the things that happens when you look at a bunch of different software implementations, is it server-based or cloud-based, all these things, it's like the question is who's handling that risk? What's the outlier? We wrote our C-level at AvePoint wrote an article about how we have 1,500 employees, and they tested everything that we have running on premises for over 1,000 employees to make sure that our VPN was strong enough to have the vast majority of our workers being able to hit those servers at any given time. So that's the right way to do it, right? That's how an organization should behave and be thinking, because disasters happen. There's a lot of financial people out there and a lot of thinkers that write about this. It's like, look, you can't plan specifically for everything, but you can set aside resources and approach things with a mentality of like, okay, you know what? The likelihood is not that a meteor is going to strike the Earth and everything is going to explode, but what if, and that doesn't mean that you have
Yep.
to spend all your money preparing for that scenario, right? But you do need to understand what's going to happen in a worst case scenario. You don't have to buy the tools necessarily and push everything out to the extreme. There's a balance, right? But everyone needs to be thinking about it, because in the scenario that a pandemic happens and we're all locked inside of our homes, right? And me, I love history. History is a hobby of
Yeah.
mine. And I can tell you there are so many things that we take for granted right now. When you look back in history and you look at all of the death and the carnage and the crazy things that have happened in the world, volcano eruptions and earthquakes, there is very little that is out of bounds. The fires that, I mean, look at the Chicago fire. I don't think
Yeah.
that anybody in Chicago is thinking that a fire like that could ever happen again, but it's like, I mean, like,
I mean,
maybe
hopefully
not for
they're
the whole
building
city,
it
but
such a way
like
it doesn't.
for part of it.
But
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
so the point is that the more that you are prepared, the better off you're going to be in a situation like that. So, without digressing too much, what we're seeing now that this thing has happened, right? Organizations that even maybe not the whole organization had this in mind, but like we're talking about, and this is one of the reasons that it's so great to be in this industry. There are passionate people that understand these things and they care about what they do and they care about their organizations and the people they work with.
Right.
And so what do on the back end? Man, they're sitting there, they're trying to get everything running. They're just kind of, I call it a drip, right? They're dripping this information onto people. Listen, this could happen and we need to have these services ready to go if it does, right? Or there's
Yep.
reasons we have these things like they are. It's more secure, it's more dependable, it's easier, it's better for the organization, et cetera, et cetera. And right now, those people are heroes. In 6 months to a year, they may be totally back to the exact place they were before, right? But
Yes.
the question remains, okay, so now this has happened. Now what, right? What's happening?
Yeah.
What are we seeing with organizations besides the anecdotes that we just gave, right? Clearly, there's pain points. Some people are coming out heroes. Some organizations are coming into this like, hey, we're so glad we did all this stuff. The impact's not that crazy on us. Let's pivot. Let's move. Other organizations are like, it's the end of the world. Come on, IT, save us, save us, save us, save us, save us.
Yeah.
So you're somewhere on that spectrum right now if you're listening to this, very likely, right? So let's talk about it, Jay. Why don't you throw out some of these scenarios, right? And like, what's this look like inside of organizations and the exact strategy that's happening?
Well, it's interesting because over the last handful of months, I've had. Let me actually go further back. So over the last year, prior to this,
Hey, that takes me back.
I've had a number of conversations with people looking at Office 365, going, how do we move from our on-premises environment where we control everything all the way down to the bare metal and the concrete pad? How do we move to a software as a service model where Microsoft controls a significant portion of that, and now we're just consumers of this tool? And so when it comes to that, we're talking about security and we're talking about giving up control, but let's just look at the knowledge itself, right? How do we actually migrate that content? How do we migrate the users? And how do we start training them on these new technologies? So one thing that we've seen a lot of, first of all, is that Microsoft has done what it could to make it easy to move people over. So OneDrive's been around for a while. We were using it before we used it in the SaaS model as a software as a service. We had it installed locally. Everyone had a OneDrive account, and that's where we stored our files. If you think back 5-10 years ago, or if you're in the government space 6 months ago, you probably had a P drive or an H drive, your home drive. It was a folder you browsed to, and that's where you put all your stuff. OneDrive is Microsoft's replacement for that, built on top of SharePoint. Microsoft over the last couple of years has made it really easy. I remember when they turned on the feature that literally said, take the My Computer folder and just put it in OneDrive. And I'm going to keep looking at the My Computer folder, and you're just going to keep moving that content into OneDrive, so it's constantly there. If I'm not at my computer, I'm at another computer, I can log into Office, I can access my files, and there we go. And so they've done their part, and as with that as an example of just trying to make it as easy as possible to start getting stuff into Office 365, into a cloud model. And if you're trying to figure out, well, why do I care about that? If you go back to what Hunter said about VPN and about having access to your network, if your VPN is designed to handle 250 people and all of a sudden you find 1,500 people working from home trying to access their files through that VPN connection, you're not going to be successful. But if you're looking at Office 365, which is accessible anywhere, as long as you've got the right security capabilities set up, you're good. You're good to go. And so Microsoft's been trying to move people in this direction. The other conversation that I've had a lot is, let's not talk about the bulk of everything all at once. Let's talk about new workloads. Let's take, you want to take advantage of something like Microsoft Teams. What is Teams? If you're familiar with Facebook, very similar capabilities of being able to very easily talk with people and very easily share with them, except designed for the workplace, being able to organize security boundaries real easily, etc. Consumers are used to it. They want to be able to do it. They've been pushing for it for years. Microsoft's got this great tool out there, but IT has been, either IT or someone slowing IT down has been a reason why it hasn't been available, right? So rather than saying, well, I have to move all of my stuff into SharePoint, then we can talk about Teams. Well, let's pump the brakes a little bit. Let's look at the new thing and how can we utilize the new thing while bringing these other things in a timely but appropriate manner so that we're able to evaluate risk, like Hunter said. So we don't have to do everything at once. What are these new
cloud
workloads
first
we can move
mentality
forward with? Yeah, the cloud first mentality, man. Anyway.
Look, let's get going with the new technologies, learn how to use it so that while you're doing that, things are rolled out in a phased manner. And what we're seeing with this now, right? So all of this stuff is hitting organizations that maybe we're like, nah, this is in our 3-year timeline, right? Or like maybe we've kind of slowly been doing this for the past year and it's kind of held up and stuff. And now it's like, hey, we need this tomorrow. So
yeah,
they're getting into this phase where they are, lift and shifting the content. What we mean by that is they're just migrating it in its exact same structure as it was on premises and moving it into the cloud. We have several customers that we've been talking to where the organization is forcing IT to just let users use whatever they want to. Dropbox, G Suite, Slack. If those are your primary collaboration platforms, then Office 365 and the stuff that you're, whatever your organization is not typically able to control and see and have access to, right? So we understand, again, in my mind, yes, this is existential. If the people can't collaborate, productivity slows and the organization is going to be at risk, jobs will be at risk. You notice we're concerned about people's jobs in these conversations. Yeah. Organizations' money is important, but the thing that, we're in this to help people. And from my mind, it just occurred to me, I was just kind of like, wait a minute. Yes, we want organizations to make money, but in my mind, this is about people's jobs and livelihoods in the short term because, that's pumping the economy, number one. But number two, this is people's lives, man. It's their families. It's their ability to carry on with the lives they had and maintain a quality of life and their health and safety too, right? So, so the point is that there's going to be tons of chaos in a situation like that. And sometimes IT doesn't have control over that, how that rolls out. And sometimes even when they do have control, their timeline is so tight. It's just unrealistic to apply, controls around those situations. So the immediate things that pop to my mind is that, listen, as much as you can, if you're in one of these situations where the organization is moving, right? As you're moving and as users are, putting information into what we call shadow IT workspaces, which it doesn't matter what platform it is. It's just whatever's not official, whatever you can't have insights into, see, control, apply security settings to, things like that, right?
Right.
For your organization as an official collaboration platform, take notes on what's happening. As much as you can, have processes to find out which platforms users are getting. One idea would be to come up with an addendum that eventually will get passed out once all of this settles down a little bit more to say, listen, you've got to attest as a user of this organization where your data lives, and you're swearing that it's nowhere else, right? So that IT knows all the collaboration platforms where it is, make everyone
Right.
sign it, just so you have that information on the whole, and then go through the process of removing shadow IT, which is not to say, look, there's an end date to this and there's going to be penalties if you don't follow it. But it's listen, get them running right now, get them in the cloud, to that end, right? With that quick shift. There's also Microsoft has been doing a great job of adding to their user training content and pushing it out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they've been very, very vocal about what's out there. There's a whole YouTube channel just dedicated to Teams training for COVID right now from Microsoft. That's amazing, right? Aya Tanj is a product marketing developer, product marketing executive, I guess, for Microsoft. And she's been sharing all sorts of this great content, right? Since all of this happened. So follow her on LinkedIn. Check out everything that's going on with Microsoft and Teams to find this content. There's all sorts of stuff all over the place. It's not ideal for your organization to rely on content that's not contextual, right? Because users don't know exactly how their department's doing this, right? But right now, that doesn't matter. As long as they get the basics down of how to use Teams, how to use SharePoint, OneDrive, and all these things, they can at least get started with it, right? Because again, it's not about, in this situation, it's not about having that perfect change management plan and rolling it out slowly. It's about, hey, how can we get everybody going tomorrow? It's not perfect, but this is a great way to get started, sharing that content with them, holding trainings as much as you can yourself while these changes are happening. But again, most of all, for you looking 6 months down the road here, take notes, record. If you're doing migration projects, right, and running migration jobs, save every single one of the job results, failed or not, and come up right now with naming conventions and strategies for storing those notes. Use OneNote, use tabs in OneNote, right? Save those files with a naming convention in them in OneDrive in Teams, and make sure you're backing it up or have good, really, really tight security around it, so that in a few months, when the cleanup and data governance piece of all this comes, you've got something to work with, right? Because if you're just willy-nilly letting all this stuff happen and not capturing any data around it, it's going to be way more of a nightmare.
Yeah.
And then
it's
I was just going to say for the change management shadow IT reduction, right? That becomes later on, right? That becomes about solving the use case. Why do they go shadow IT? Why do they do that? They think it's easier. Okay, what's the pain point? Why do they think it's easier? Train them and show them how to do it in your official platform in a way that's easy and contextual for them, and make them understand what's in it for them, right? That's the only way to get them off it. And then you can start setting the rules, saying, look, we're going to control the Dropbox domain, the Slack domain, the Office 365 domain, the G Suite domain, whatever it is, on X date. And you're not going to be able to access it from a managed device or from any internal network, right?
Yeah.
Which isn't going to stop everything, but it gets close.
It's interesting. You started talking about, I brought up the whole do new workloads, and you started talking about migration, and it brought me back to your risk comment. People, yes, there are definitely different types of people when it comes to risk, but generally speaking, people tend to be more willing to take a risk. Corporations tend to be less willing to take a risk, and so
corporations are not people in Jay's mind.
Let's not get political, but it's what's interesting to me about that is a corporation will take years to plan and look at the risk and design different mitigation strategies. And quote I heard today that kind of blew my mind. So Satya Nadella, in their quarterly earnings call this past week, was quoted as saying, in the last 2 months, in that 2-month period of middle of January to middle of March, we saw 2 years worth of digital transformation happen. So 12 times faster than normal, they saw corporations and governments throwing their data into the cloud, throwing their people into the cloud. I wouldn't go so far as saying, throwing everything to the wind, but definitely like cutting corners to get up and running faster, because the option was cut corners and get up and running faster, or don't do anything. And don't do anything when all your people are working from home for the first time. I've got people working for the government in spaces that are generally cleared, where they're being told you can't come into the office. So you got to work on a different set of tasks, maybe stuff we've kind of pushed to the back burner because of the priorities, but you got to do it from home. So we have to cut corners. We have to get you access to data. And so if you find yourself in the position of cutting those corners on behalf of your corporation, like Hunter said, if you're documenting what you're doing, you're not doing it in a malicious way. You're documenting what you're doing because I guarantee you 3 months from now, you're not going to remember half of what you did.
Yep.
And so by having that documented, now you can go back and say, okay, let's see what we did. Let's make sure we can start locking it down.
And we're coming from the the collaboration data side of this too. But man, for those of you that deal with like cloud applications and databases and all that kind of sophisticated cloud stuff that's outside of the collaboration platform, same principle applies, right? This is ubiquitous. Even when you're managing networks and stuff, as you're changing network routing and things like that, however you're interacting with your data centers, whatever's going on, whatever technology it is, whatever change is happening right now, document it. Document it.
Yeah.
I was going to say, from a risk perspective, reducing that risk over time is really important. There's a lot of different kinds of risk, and that's a word that's thrown around widely, right? When Jay's talking about the corporation being the entity that's trying to reduce that risk, a lot of times that means that you all are the enforcers of that, right? Especially when the security team is trying to tell IT what to do to make sure it happens, and IT has to figure out what they mean and then apply their rules, right? And the end users in this, though, they don't care. Even sometimes when they're required to care, they don't know how, right? So, and that's typically, that's the response that we get from IT. But there are a lot of users that do care. But again, these are scenarios where you're not alone. You can reach out to power users. You can make friends, the kind of change management strategies that we looked at on the back end. If they can just like help their team understand and record what's going on, or maybe if you can get low-level managers to say, listen, you guys want something easier, we're going to use this platform, and try to get them all into one instance of that platform, so you're not scrambling around trying to grab every single individual user's OneDrive information or like box information, right? And get that back into the platform of record, if you will.
Yep. So as you're doing this, as you're trying to evaluate or have been evaluating, what do we quickly throw into the cloud? What can we roll out really fast? Don't forget, go back to our previous conversation on change management. Start telling everybody as openly as you can, here's what's available to you. Here's what's not available to you and why. And here's when we hope to get that available to you. Like, you have to be doing right now. And during a time where we're seeing so much change so quickly, you're going to have to be willing to be wrong. That's really the answer.
Yep.
If you're willing to be wrong, like, tell your people, we're rolling out Teams today. It cracks me up. Okay, so lots of new features over the last few weeks for Microsoft Teams. And the one that's been touted the most is this 3x3 grid of people. Right now, you're looking at the Hunter and I, we're two people side by side. Teams has traditionally only had double that. So if you have 5 people in a meeting, you can see 4 of their videos in that quadrant style video. Biggest competitor on the video conferencing space has a massive grid, so you can see tons of people. If you watched like the Disney sing-along last week, you saw like 13 people on a screen. You can't do that with Teams. Well, over the last few weeks, Microsoft has been saying, we're coming with a 3x3 grid. You're going to be able to see 9 people. We call it the Brady Bunch. And that's great. But now people are mad because it's not there yet. And it's like, well, you know what? Like, I had to tell you it was coming because you needed to know. Right? Yet you needed to know that this change was coming. You needed to have that ball of hope that when you got on your social call or your meeting, that you were going to be able to do this. But we also need to roll it out respectfully. So here's why it's going to take a little bit longer to get to you than you might like. So you have to be willing to be wrong, but be communicative in what and why. Sorry, that was a really circuitous story.
This is good. No, it's true, man. It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. So to sum up that conversation and to kind of start to wrap things up here a little bit, like, really what we're talking about is, listen, if I had to like thesis this conversation, I would say, you know what, there's a ton of change happening. Some organizations were prepared more than others, but nobody was prepared 100% for this. And
Right.
there's going to be a lot of change that you can manage and a lot of data that you can control in this. There's also going to be a lot of stuff that you have no control over whatsoever, either because of the organization or because of the circumstances. And that's kind of normal for IT, but now it's like
Yeah.
pressed into like a couple of weeks instead of it being like 2 years or something. So, do the best you can, but document everything. I would go so far as to say that documentation is more important than the moving of the data, because if you don't know
Yes.
where it went and what it was, you'll never be able to clean it up later, and users are going to lose it and they're not going to know where it was. And when they come to ask you to solve the problem, you're going to be like, oh, we moved it too fast and they said that we couldn't do it, so I don't know where it is. It's y'all's problem. And
Yeah.
nobody likes those situations, because then pitchforks and torches, right? That's what I say. The pitchforks and torches of the end users come barreling down to the castle of IT, and IT has to put up the barricade. And it's a drawn in fight, and you don't want that. Nobody wants that.
Yeah. I will say one other thing. So the saying that I hear a lot, and there are different variations of this, is you can't put the genie back in the bottle once he's out. When it comes to the changes we're seeing, we are not likely to go back to technology the way it was 6 months ago. We are very unlikely to see long rollout plans. We are very unlikely to see long planning stages. Um, for a decade, we've been talking about getting rid of waterfall, that idea of lots of planning, lots of planning, lots of planning, and then do the whole project at once. Like we've been trying to get rid of that for a long time. I think you're going to see that go even further away. But when it comes to that, and where I'm going with this, I know,
No, I
is
was gonna say like down a waterfall.
is when it comes to that is you need to be thinking about that genie you've let out, and that's why you're documenting all of this. Is it's not that you're going to get it back, it's not that you're going to be able to completely clean it back up, but by knowing what you let out, by knowing where you put something, by knowing who you enable to do something, you can then start to wrap around and clean that up as we come back to whatever the new normal is going to be.
And also, as you're looking at these new applications and you're taking those notes, you're seeing it happen, right?
Yeah.
It gets the juices flowing. You can start making a plan and understanding what you're going to have to do in the next
Mm-hmm.
couple of months. What applications are going to need more training than others? What do people like? What don't they like? And as people are requesting data to move, where's that data going and why? And what's the governance going to have to look like for it, right? So don't just record it and write it down so you can fix it later. Start planning now so that you can get going with that in the future, right? As soon as you can.
Yes.
Because again, with this mentality of what we were talking about in the last episode, change management not being a project, what Jay just said, it's not a waterfall anymore. It's going to keep changing. So you're going to need to start dealing with the cleanup of this change the second that the implementation, however rough it goes right this second, right? As soon as users get productive, that needs to be start being part of your workload. The cleanup, the ongoing maintenance. Start thinking to yourself, what's the tenant going to look like 6 months, 18 months down the road from now, right?
So in the coming weeks, we're going to revisit these topics at a little bit deeper level. We did the intro to change management last week, and I really think that is the thesis for Buzzkill, is really starting to understand how do we take this IT infrastructure and how do we actually keep it modern and successfully change what we're providing to the end user so that the organizational mission can grow and be successful over time. Today, we introduced the problem that we're seeing, and really, I think the impetus for why Hunter and I were finally able to sit down and actually have these conversations, because there is this seismic shift in how things were happening, and we'll start talking about, okay, how do you identify these workloads? How do you migrate your content or your technology or your people? How do you implement governance, and what does that really mean? It's funny. I see governance. I have conversations with organizations that are like, we have a governance plan, and they'll send it to me, and it's 90 pages of these theoretical things you should consider. And one that I looked at recently did not once mention the name of a division within the organization. And you might think, well, that's fine because the division names change, and you're absolutely right. First thing you need to realize is a governance plan is a living document, and it has to change as your organization changes. But you may want to consider specific controls each division requires because they're going to have different needs. And if your plan is all theoretical, then you don't have anything you can act on. So we'll talk about how do you design governance and how do you convince people to actually give you the time you need for that.
Yep.
So yeah, and I hope we talk about risk. I like that you brought that up today. I wrote an
We'll
article
talk about
about risk about 6 years ago,
We'll talk
and
about
I think there's going to be some really good conversations in there.
We
So,
won't get too risky though.
oh well, I got nothing clean to respond with there, Hunter.
Hey yo. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate it. We got to wrap things up now. Again, this has been Buzzkill. My name's Hunter Willis. Jay Leask. Really appreciate being on here. Having a great time so far. And hope you'll check us out next time. And if you haven't already, go back and watch the previous podcast that we did as well on change management. Really appreciate you. And I hope everybody stays well, safe, and just keep doing the best you can at whatever it is you do. And if you've lost your job or you're having a tough time, reach out to the community. There's still people hiring. There's a lot of stuff going on in the IT community right now. And so, and if you do have a job, help others that, have lost their job or in tough times right now. Do what you can to help them out and point them in the right direction.
Yeah, I got to share this. One of the things I saw last night while browsing around was there are a couple of organizations that have banded together, including the Washington Nationals Philanthropy Group, and they are actually paying people who are unemployed to work at the food bank because the food bank has seen such a rise in people needing assistance that they need more volunteers to help, but the food bank doesn't have money to pay. And so these philanthropic organizations have come together. So it's really interesting to see the shift in how people are working together. So just to follow on what you said, Hunter, don't give in to the despair, find the hope, because there are people there trying to find the hope. And if you band together, it's there. It's a good place to be. And I've digressed far too much. Thank you, Hunter.
Amen, brother.